Hello, everyone. Reverend Sarah Grady from St. Paul's United Church in Paris. I hope you're doing well this week. I'm going to dive right into our reflection time this week rather than give any announcements because we have a pretty big topic to go over this week. And I just want to remind folks, we're doing a guest sermon series, a guest preacher series online here, and it is based around our book, And She Said, Monologues on Biblical Women by the author Betty Radford Turcotte. And Betty Radford Turcotte has reimagined biblical women who are unnamed in the Bible, and she has helped put a name and a backstory to these women for us. So our first week was Reverend Maya from Islington United Church, who offered us a backstory and some insight into Marnie, the bent-over woman. And this past Sunday, we had Reverend Doug Peck offer us a message on Veronica, the bleeding woman in Mark's Gospel, or the hemorrhaging woman. And so there's a couple of things that I want to unpack about this passage. So the first thing is when we talk about somebody who is hemorrhaging, and this passage in particular, lots of people say, well, I don't want to listen to that. That's a passage that makes me uncomfortable. And I am guilty, just like everybody else, of doing this at times when there are passages that are difficult to understand, that we don't want to be bothered looking up the context for or understanding why they were back then versus how we might understand them now. We just don't do it. And this is a passage that's one of them for a lot of people. So I want to hear from you. Is there a passage in the Bible that you shy away from? If you know that that's the sermon preached on a Sunday around a certain text, do you not go to church? Do you avoid it altogether? I know lots of people who avoid Good Friday because it is just too sensitive. It's too emotional for them to actually hear the story of Jesus being crucified on Good Friday. So they don't go. It's not for them. Is there something like that you shy away from in terms of your faith journey, in terms of a biblical passage? Love to hear about that. So that's the first thing. The second part of this passage that I want to talk about is we have a woman who has a medical condition. It is beyond her control. She is hemorrhaging. She starts with the natural cycle that happens to a woman at a certain age. You start your monthly periods, but it just keeps going. And it causes her to become an outcast. She's shunned. She can't sit with people. She can't drink with people. She can't stay with her family. She can't get a partner because she has a condition that no doctor can help her with. And it is beyond anybody's capabilities to help her to heal until she meets Jesus. And so I want to stay with that part of the story, not the Jesus part, but the before she meets Jesus part, because I think there are lots of examples of times in our human history when people have been shunned because the larger majority of society doesn't understand. So a couple of modern day examples or things that are not too removed from our modern times. And today seems like a good one to talk about segregation. We are at February 1st here, and February in Canada is Black History Month. And so we are not far removed from the time when segregation was a very real thing in Canada, when people of color could not sit in the same space as white people in movie theaters and on buses and at other event centers, when people of color had to drink out of different drinking fountains and use different washrooms or go in different doorways into schools. That is not that far removed. And there's being shunned right there. It is beyond the control of a human who is born with a certain color of skin. It is within the grasp and the control of people around them to treat them the way that they do. So that's where I think we can relate with Veronica in that. The second thing that came to mind when we were chatting about this in our clergy group was the HIV and AIDS epidemic in the 1980s and early 90s, before it was really understood how the HIV virus worked and how people contracted it. There was this fear around it, that it was airborne and that people who had it were unclean and disgusting. And there are untold stories and some told stories that we know of people who died alone and scared and without anybody to support them because they contracted HIV and which turned to AIDS, and it's pretty sad. And so that's a more recent example of people who are shunned because the larger majority of people, including the medical community, did not understand yet what was going on. I think we can find stories now of people who've been shunned with COVID. We can, I was actually not even back at the beginning of the pandemic. I do know somebody back at the beginning of the pandemic who contracted COVID they were traveling from work when things hit and contracted it. And they did not want to tell anybody. They didn't want to share their story because they just, for like 3 or 4 months, they didn't tell anybody that it was COVID that they'd been sick with because they did not want this stigma placed on them. And the other thing I can think of is mental health. For I don't know how many years, thousands of years, people with mental health struggles, rather than trying to understand it or help people with mental health struggles, we have been terrible in our human history, putting people in things like asylums and sanatoriums and just in general treating them poorly because we don't understand the chemical imbalance happening in somebody's mind. It's been something else that came up for me when we think of Veronica, the bleeding woman, and her situation and how she was excluded because of something that was beyond her control. So these are really big points of conversation for this week. Lots to think about. I hope that you'll feel comfortable giving me a call or shooting me an email and letting me know your thoughts. If you've got a story to share or something about this passage that you want to address, I'd be happy to chat about it with you. And of course, wherever you are, I hope you're safe, I hope you're well, and I get to see you soon. We'll talk to you later, friends.